William has put together a series of interviews with sex workers, rights activists to help tell the story of the work William does in the adult industry.
What is your relationship to William?
William and I are both volunteers with the Desiree Alliance and activists who support the rights of sex workers as well as the rights of the sexual rights of people living with disabilities.
Please share a bit about your history and how you came to be involved with SWAP and the Desiree Alliance.
I am one of the co-founders of the Desiree Alliance and the Sex Workers Outreach Project. I got involved because I have worked in the sex industry and believe that we need labor rights to make the industry better for the workers, and so that's why I helped start these organizations.
How do you feel about the disabled and sexuality and their right to have sex?
Well, I think that sexuality is a right for everybody, living with disabilities or not, and I think that sexuality is just one of the many things, social interactions and human interactions that people living with disabilities can be deprived of. And I think that, it's unfortunate that in our society people tend to think that people living with disabilities don't have sexual feelings, that somehow their disability makes them not a sexual being. And then there are also people who believe that sexuality is not a priority or a right, that if you're living with a disability, it's not something that you are entitled to experience. And I certainly disagree with those attitudes. I think that people living with disabilities need sex in as much as an opportunity to give and receive affection and to have that personal interaction. But I also think that sex is a good, healthy thing when it's done consensually and in informed, healthy ways. So I think that helping give people who live with disabilities access to safe and healthy sex actually can help with some of their conditions like spasticity and other things. And certainly I think that some of the disabled people that I've spent time with express loneliness and isolation and alienation, and that's depressing and brings you down. So sex is something that puts a smile on your face and makes you feel good all over.
What experiences have you had in the past with people who are disabled in a sexual or a professional context?
I have had sexual relationships with people who live with disabilities both in my personal off-work time as well as in a professional context. On 2 occasions I was hired by the mother of 2 different young men, adult men who were living with disabilities, and I really admire a parent who values giving their child that experience. I think that's just incredibly compassionate and understanding the whole being that your child is. I think that's fantastic. I've also just been hired by people who live with disabilities themselves, and they always express that meeting people is hard for them, that they may have a visual, physical disability that actually makes people not want to get involved with them or even speak to them. Some people actually have like a visceral kind of gag response when they see people who have physical disabilities, and I think a lot of that is just lack of education and misinformation. So I think that not just the sex part of things and whether that you have function and are able to move and interact in all the ways that you want to, but aside from sex, people are really not getting to interact in an emotional way and able to discuss their deep feelings and perceptions of the world with somebody who they feel intimate with, because people aren't really, they're not meeting people who are willing to enter into intimate relationships with them. I know that there are communities of people that some who call themselves devotees, and they specifically are attracted to people with disabilities, and I've had people with disabilities express mixed feelings about that. For some it's very flattering, and they're very receptive to it, and for others it feels a little bit like it can be violating in some way, like they don't want their disability to be fetishized in the context of their partner's sexuality. And, you know, so when a disabled person actually does get into a relationship, then how do they find the ways to have these conversations with their partners about what are healthy boundaries and what are we interested in about each other, and how are we going to express ourselves and share each other? I haven't seen a whole lot of resources out there for people who are struggling with these kinds of questions. There's a great organization in the UK called The Outsiders, and they're kind of a social club, a social network, and they have done amazing work in helping people who live with disabilities and their partners learn to communicate with each other, and I think that I would love to see more of that happening here in the U.S. I think that we're behind in a lot of ways.
How has interacting with William affected your attitudes about sexuality and disability?
Well, William has been an amazing contributor in our field of sex workers' rights activism. There are so many parallels between how people living with disabilities can be discriminated against and how sex workers can be discriminated against. We're such natural allies. So seeing William come in and be active in our conferences I really admire and appreciate it, but also it's important even for the sex workers, because even among us, not all of us are open to interacting with people who have disabilities, and not that anybody should feel obligated to as a sex worker. I think that sex workers are always able to set their own boundaries no matter what. But I think that we also have a professional calling to educate ourselves and learn about people who really need our support and services, and he has almost single-handedly brought that angle into our work. We've also had some great contributions from people like Rachel Watton of Touching Base in Australia, which is a training program for sex workers who work legally in Australia to learn how to specifically provide services to people who are living with disabilities. I participated in a one-day seminar that they did, and the amount of information that sex workers need to take in and know to really understand the disability culture and how sexuality has either been over pushed on them or totally deprived, you know, that this is something for sex workers to really bring their compassion and their understanding to.
How can advocacy for education surrounding disability and sexuality and sex work or rights work together? How are the causes similar or symbiotic? How are they different?
Yeah, I think I already touched on some of the ways that they're similar, because you know, socially we are alienated from a lot of rights that other people who are not disabled or sex workers enjoy, and I think that we share this kind of stigmatization that our society actually believes that it's okay for sex workers to be denied rights, and that it's okay for people living with disabilities to not have access into spaces where sexuality is happening. So I think that probably the number one thing that we share is just how completely misunderstood we are. And I think that one of the most valuable things about this intersection between sex workers' rights and sexual rights for the disabled is that we can come together and sort of cope with being these social outcasts, and we've built community and made community so that we're no longer just outsiders. We are actually a part of something. And I know for me, and I think based on feedback that I get from people around me, that having that access to community is part of just what makes you healthier anyway. And having that community, whether you're coping with a physical or mental disability that is just hard day to day, or whether you're dealing with incredibly mean discrimination because people think your sexual behavior means you're a bad person, these things are heavy, and we can come together, and having our communities makes it easier to cope with that stuff and easier to let it roll off your back, because when you're getting the affection and support that you need, it doesn't matter how other people are treating you.
As a sex worker / former sex worker / sex worker advocate, what more do you want to learn about disability and sexuality?
I really want to learn more specifically about sexual function as it relates to specific conditions. So looking at paralysis, looking at cerebral palsy, looking at muscular dystrophy, like how do these specific kinds of conditions affect sexual function, and as a sex worker or just as an intimate partner, how can I be educating myself better to provide the best experience possible for both of us?
Wow.